Jaya Vrindavan. All together, bolo. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Krishna, Jaya Vrindavan. And that's all there's to it, really. Shama Kunda, Radha Kunda, Giri Govardhan, Shama Kunda, Kalindi Jamuna Jaya, Jaya Madhavananda, Kalindi Jamuna Jaya, Jaya Madhavananda, Vrindavan, Jaya Vrindavan. All together, bolo. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Vrindavan, Jaya Vrindavan. Keshigata, Bangsivata, Dwadashakana, Keshigata, Bangsivata, Dwadashakana, Jaha Shabalila Koilo Shri Nanda Nanda, Jaha Shabalila Koilo Shri Nanda Nanda, Jaya Vrindavan, bolo. Jaya Radhe, Shinanda Jasoda Jaya, Jaya Gopagan, Soda Jaya, Jaya Gopagan, Shidamari Jaya, Jaya Denu Vatsagan, Shidamari Jaya, Jaya Denu Vatsagan, Radhe, Jaya Vrindavan, Jaya Vrishabhanu Jaya, Kirtida Sundari, Kirtida Sundari, Jaya Purnamasi Jaya Abhiranagari, Jaya Purnamasi Jaya 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 Gopishwara Vrindavana Maj. Hey Gopishwara Vrindavana Maj. Jaya Jaya Krishna Saka Bhattu Dvija Raj. Jaya 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 Vrindavan. Bolo bolo. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna. Jaya Rama Gata Jaya Rohini Nandan. Jaya Rama Gata Jaya Rohini Nandan. Jaya Jaya Vrindavan Vasi Jata Jaya. Jaya Jaya Vrindavana Vasi Jata Jaya. Jaya Jaya Vrindavana Vasi Jata Vrindavan. Vrindavana Jaya Vrindavan. Bolo bolo. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna. Jaya Vrindavana Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Dvija Patni Jaya Naga Kanyagan. Bhakti Teja Hara Pailo Govinda Charan. 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 Vrindavana Jaya Radhe Krishna Vrindavana. Jaya Samandala Jaya Jaya Radha Shyam Shirasa. Rasa Mandala Jaya Jaya Radha Shyam. Jaya Jaya Sarva Manoram. Jaya Jaya Rasa Lila Sarva Manoram. Jaya Jaya Rasa Lila Sarva Manoram. Vrindavana Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Radhe Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Jaya Ujvala Rasa Sarva Rasa Sar. Jaya Jaya Ujvala Rasa Sarva Rasa Sar. Parakiya Bhaveja Brajete Prachar. Parakiya Bhaveja Brajete Prachar. Vrindavan. Sijanava Pada Padma Korya Smaran. Sijanava Pada Padma Korya Smaran. Sijanava Pada Padma Korya Smaran. Dina Krishna Dasa Kohe Nama Sankirtan. 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 Vrindavana Jaya Vrindavan. Radhe Krishna Vrindavan. Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Vrindavan. Jaya Vrindavan. Radhe Krishna Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Stop. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, devotion to you. You help me sing. All together one more time. Bolo. Bolo, bolo. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Krishna, Jaya Vrindavan, Jaya. One more time, a little louder, please. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Krishna, Jaya Vrindavan. Shri Govinda Gopinatha Madana Mohan. 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 Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan. Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan. Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Radhe Jaya Krishna Jaya Shri Radha Madan Mohan Ju Ki Shiva Prabhupada Ki Shri Shiva Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada Ki Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Samabhita Bhakti Vrinda Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Shiva Prabhupada. Goragraganya Gana Gotra Goloruharam Gauranga Gurachama Gopyada Kolpa Briksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavaram Satatam Namami Uttama Adama Kichuna Bachila Jachi Adile Kakola Kahe Premananda Hemona Gauranga Hridoya Dadiya Bola Bhaja Gauranga Kaha Gauranga Laha Gaurangira Namure Bolo Bhaja Gauranga Kaha Gauranga Laha Gaurangira Namure Jai Jana Gauranga Bhaje Se Hoy Amara Prana Re Jai Jana Gauranga Bhaje Se Hoy Amara Prana Re Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Yashaiva Padambuja Bhakti Labhya Prema Bidana Parama Pumata Tasmai Jagan Mangala Mangalaya Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Chaitanya Chandraya Namo Namaste Madgavirapi Gopala Svikriyat Kripaya Judi Tadaiva Sambhaya Pidva Rishayustat Priya Janaha Shri Krishna Krishna Chaitanya Sasanatana Rupaka Gopala Raghunathabda Brajabala Pahiman Vanchakalpatarubhischa Kripa Sindhubhya Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we want to speak a little something from Krishna Lila, Kaliya Damana Lila. Oh, thank you. And say a little something about how this pastime relates to community building or making Vrindavan villages. Once in Hawaii, Srila Prabhupada, he visited the farm they had there, and Prabhupada told him, he said, this is our mission. We should make villages like this all over the world, Vrindavan villages. So there's 2 sessions we're going to do on this today and tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning we'll speak about Keshi, and today we'll speak about Kaliya. And they represent 2 different obstacles that prevent us from being part of community, that prevent us from having success in our community. So I want to read a little something to you from, this is from the 15th chapter of the 10th canto, 16th chapter. There's a chapter that speaks about Kaliya Damana Lila. This is from the 15th chapter. It's text number 47. Evam sa Bhagavan Krishno Vrindavana charat vachit yayo ramam rite rajan kalindim sakibir brataha. O King, the Supreme Lord Krishna, this is just after Sukadeva Goswami's finished relating the pastime of Dhenukasura. And interestingly, the story finishes, but the chapter doesn't finish with that. And why is it that that goes on? So let's read this verse. O King, the Supreme Lord Krishna thus wandered about the Vrindavan area, performing his pastimes. Once, surrounded by his boyfriends, he went without Balaram to the Jamuna River. And the verse here describes Ramam Rite. This is a phrase which we found in the when this pastime is described in the Brahma-Vivarta Purana, in the Vishnu Purana, in the Harivamsa Purana. There it usually says Vina Rama, without Balaram. And here it says Ramam Rite, with the same meaning, without Balaram. So I'm going to read you just a little bit from some English translations of just a little of Jiva Goswami's commentary and a little of Sanatana Goswami. They say more things. Actually, Jiva kind of gives a whole summary to this pastime, as does Sanatana Goswami, but I won't go through all that. So Jiva explains, he says, he says it would be appropriate to end the chapter here. But why then is he continuing now, and he's starting a new subject? Right? The chapter should be finished here, and then the next chapter should begin with Kaliya Damana. He says, but because Sukadeva Goswami was feeling very confused, Sukadeva Goswami was feeling very disturbed, and he was suffering because of this confusion, because he was thinking about this Kaliya Damana Lila, which actually happened prior to Balaram's killing Dhenuka. Right? Sometimes the sequence doesn't follow exactly, and there's reasons for it. Our acharyas speak about that. He says, Sukadeva Goswami begins the story from the beginning because he's overwhelmed with remembrance. So he finishes his chapter with just giving an introduction to the story. So, okay, we can understand. That's all I'm going to read from Jiva Goswami, his translation, that this verse gives an introduction to that pastime. And there's a few more verses. He kind of summarizes, he speaks about the beginning part of the pastime and this end of this chapter. Now, Sanatana Goswami gives a very long purport. I'm not going to, long commentary in Brihad Vaishnava Toshini. I'm just going to read 2 sentences from it, 3 sentences. That the word Kalindi in the verse means the daughter of the sun, Kalinda, right? Kalindi is a word for the Jamuna. Kalinda also indicates destroying the faults of Kali Yuga and destroying qualities. She had qualities like him. Okay, so now what I'd like to try to do is to discuss a little bit about these 2 points, okay, our 2 points that we just heard, Jiva Goswami explaining why Sukadeva Goswami just couldn't control himself, and why he started speaking about this Kaliya Damana Lila out of context. It happened before Dhenuka, but he couldn't speak about it. He was too disturbed. And he finishes speaking about Dhenuka, and then it starts exploding out of him because he's very confused and disturbed. That's one thing we want to focus on. Another thing we want to focus on is a statement in the verse itself, Ramam Rite, without Balaram. I hope we have time for all this. And a third point that we want to focus on somewhat is Sanatana Goswami's very interesting point that that Kalindi is mentioned. It doesn't say Jamuna, but rather it's mentioned that Kalindim, that he went to the river Jamuna, because Kalindi is a river Jamuna, indicates that the daughter of the sun god, and as the daughter of the sun destroys inauspicious, dirty things with its brilliant rays. So also the Kalindi, the Jamuna, destroys the faults of Kali Yuga, which are in particular quarrel. So now I'd like to just go on you with a little bit of a journey today to Vrindavan. Please come with me. And we're going to go through, I usually do this discussion over about 3 to 5 days. And we're going to try to just squeeze it into one session. We need to finish by 6. Is that right? Yeah? Okay. So, first of all, let's look in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita of Sanatana Goswami. He also speaks about this pastime there. And Narad Muni is explaining the pastime to Gopakumar. And there's a very interesting verse which supports what Jiva Goswami is saying about why Sukadeva Goswami spoke this out of context because he was too disturbed. Narad Muni says, Yuvai viharo janikali yasya hriday yashoda tanayasya tasya tam smartyum isho na bhavami shoka prahasa vegat katam alapani. He says, I want to speak about this bihar, this bihar of Yashoda Tanaya, the pastime of Mother Yashoda's son. But tam smartum ishuno bhavami shoka. It causes me great pain, great shok, great lamentation. I feel so much pain to remember this thing. But at the same time, prahasya vegat is also there. Prahasya means it's also very happy. It's a mixture of things. It's a very sad topic, and it's also a very joyful topic. So now let's look at what Bhaktivinoda Thakur says about this pastime. He speaks about it in Krishna Samhita and in his Chaitanya Siksamrita. We'll just look at Chaitanya Siksamrita because that's mostly the subjects we want to speak on here. He says that in the 6th chapter there, he says that Kaliya Damana means Abhimana Kalata, Parakarita, Parakararita, Krurata, Jive Dvaya Sunyata Durikarna. This is what the qualities that Kaliya Damana Lila represent. He gives a very interesting discussion, which seems a little radical, maybe a little non-traditional, okay? In Krishna Samhita and in Chaitanya Siksamrita, he presents the naimitic Leelas, or the occasional pastimes of Krishna, especially killing the different demons, is representative of different obstacles in our path to Vrindavan. So this is an obstacle because when we speak about Vrindavan, Vrindavan is not a yogi sitting in the Himalayas in a lonely cave by himself meditating. But Vrindavan is a village. So these are qualities that bar us from entering into that village as individuals, but also keep us as a group from creating Vrindavan villages. So we'd like to look at this through that frame. This is the way we want to look at this particular subject. So what does Bhaktivinoda say? He says that Kaliya has this attitude of abhiman. He really thinks he's very, very important. He's Kalata. He's a very, very wicked person. Parakararita, parapararikata, means someone who wants to hurt others. And Krurata means cruel. He's very wicked. He wants to hurt other people. He's cruel. He gets pleasure doing that. Jiva doya sunyata. He has no compassion for the living entities. Durikarna, it means that this quality of jiva doya sunyata, it's removed, it's made distant. Durikarna, it's sent to a distant place by Kaliya. So from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's initial statements here, we can also understand that these are problems in our community and for us as individuals. And we'll speak more especially about this attitude of abhiman tomorrow with Keshi and how that disturbs our community, how it disturbs our Vrindavan villages. So these qualities of wickedness, wanting to hurt other people, being cruel, not having any compassion, not having any tolerance, it means not being able to forgive someone, Because we all make mistakes, isn't it? And really, isn't that what we're all looking for in a spouse? Someone who will love me in spite of all my bad qualities. Right? And someone may be a murderer, a mass murderer on death row, but still there's a little hope in his heart that maybe some girls are writing him letters. Maybe someone will love him in spite of those bad qualities. So we all want that, but we should give that. That's being part of the mission of Lord Nityananda Prabhu. So, the word Kaliya and the word Damana, the word Hrada, they're very significant words. Kala has several different meanings according to the dictionary. Kala means black. That means something really dark and frightening, right? Kala also is a kind of black poisonous snake. Kala also means the night. Kala also means iron, like Kali Yuga. But Kala has another meaning, which is abuse or censor, criticism, defamation. And Sanatana Goswami is pointing this out. Someone may read Krishna Samhita and think, well, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is just randomly picking something out. But he's reading Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Vaishnava Toshini. In several cases, I can see he speaks of things which Sanatana Goswami is just indicating a little bit, and Bhaktivinoda brings out more. And also Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I think, is referring to the very word Kaliya. So what does Kaliya mean? What does the suffix iya mean in Sanskrit? Iya, we have the phrase Gaudiya. Goda, Goda Desh, Gaudiya. What does the iya mean connected with Gaudiya? It means someone who belongs to Gauda Desh. It means like a Gaudiya person, a Gaudiya Vaishnava. So iya means someone who has some qualities or has something. Means belonging to. So Kaliya here means that personality who has all these qualities of Kala. He's black, he's like a poisonous snake, he's like iron, he's like the night, he's like criticism and things. Which Sanatana Goswami in Brihad Vaishnava Toshini brings out that Kalindi is mentioned in particular because she's the daughter of the sun god who particularly destroys defamation and criticism. So the Hrada, the word Hrada, comes from the same bij dhatu as Hrid, or heart. Hrada is generally means a lake or a place in the water, just like in a small stream next to the property here. You go down, there's a few Hradas in the stream. There are a few ponds or pools. So there's a Hrada in the Jamuna, and that's where Kali was living. Damana means to tame or subdue, it means to self-control. So Kaliya Damana refers to controlling all those qualities, and Kaliya Damana takes place in Kaliya Hrada. And Hrada is connected with this word Hrid, meaning the heart, because these are all qualities in our hearts. As the saying goes, we've met the enemy, and he's us. We can complain so much about other things. But as Gandhi once said, a very good thing, Gandhi's not all bad, he said some good things. He once said that we should be the solution to the problems that we see. That's very bhakti-oriented. Bhakti by nature is not focused on criticism or fault-finding. It's a positive solution. We're not focused on people's problems or with their background. We don't care about their background. We don't care what offenses they did even before. Even in the Padma Purana, Srila Vyasadeva, when he speaks about the 10 offenses, he finishes and he thinks, wow, this last offense, thinking that I'm this body, that's kind of a hard one to get over. So then he says, Nama parada yuktanam, namanyeva haranchigama vishyanti paryuktani tani veta haranicha. It's okay. Don't worry about it. Chill out. Take a deep breath. Even if you're doing an Nama Parad, just keep chanting, and it'll go away. In other words, the focus is not so much in that. Interestingly, there's a story too of Srila Prabhupada. Once he came in the room when Pradyumna was sitting, and Pradyumna Prabhu was Prabhupada's Sanskrit Pandit. He read Bengali and Sanskrit. And Pradyumna had a copy of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Harinam Chintamani, on his. That's a very wonderful book. I think all of us appreciate that book probably. But Prabhupada saw that book and he said, why are you reading that for? And Pradyumna was a little taken aback by Prabhupada's kind of dismissive tone. He said, well, Prabhupada, it's a very nice book, and sometimes you're asking me to speak about Nama Parad before the initiation ceremony, so this gives me some things to say. And Prabhupada said, that book is for beginners. Better you read Chaitanya Siksamrita or Jaiva Dharma. Prabhupada said that. That's one of the memories from Pradyumna Prabhu. So from that, I draw one conclusion that just talking about Nama Parad, that's really not our main program. Just focusing on all the negative things. Or as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta once said at Radhakund, our goal is not anartha nibriti, contrary to what a lot of devotees think. To become free from material desires. That's not our goal. Our goal, he said, is artha prabriti. We don't just want a hollow space, it's empty. We want to fill it with Sri Sri Radha Madan Mohan. That's our program. And we want to fill that space. So, we want to fill this heart, this Shraddha, with Krishna consciousness. So, Vina Ramena, we want to focus a little bit on that. I also want to speak a little something from different Puranas, different literatures about the position of the Jamuna. It's an interesting discussion. In the Vishnu Parva of the Harivamsa Purana, chapter 11, it describes the Jamuna there as Chiva Jalasaya. Chiva means Shiva. It means something very, very auspicious. That the Shiva Jalasaya, it's the life, the auspicious life of Vrindavan. So let's tack that onto Sanatana Goswami's commentary. That the Jamuna is mentioned, Kalindi is mentioned in that way because she destroys faults. So if we want to enter into Vrindavan, the life force of that Vrindavan is that there's no fault finding. Rather, there's always encouragement. In a similar way, Kavi Karnapur, in Nanda Vrindavan Champu, he gives a beautiful phrase describing Kaliya's effect on the Jamuna. He says, Yamunasya hridrogasya. Hridrogaha. Jamunaya hridrogaha. That he was like a heart disease in the Jamuna. So the heart disease in the Jamuna represents the life of Vrindavan. That water which is giving life to everyone. And one morning, Vina Ramena, without Balaram, Krishna set off to herd the cows. Now, there's a little background to that. Both Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Jiva Goswami in their commentaries say that it's mentioned that Balaram didn't come because it was his birthday that day. But reading that, when I began to study this pastime, I didn't feel completely satisfied because the point kept coming up again and again, repeatedly. No explanation was given for it, but it kept coming up. And when something keeps coming up, we can understand there's something important about it, some reason. Vyasadeva and Acharyas are focusing on this point, Vina Ramena. So one story is there that Mother Yashoda once called Krishna over. And she said, Gopal, I don't want you can go anywhere you want in Vrindavan, in Braj, herding the cows. I know you're a very fickle boy, but just one thing, don't go to Kaliya Hrada. Don't go to that bank of the Jamuna where Kali is at. And Krishna said, yes, Mother, I understand. I understand. He said, I understand. Children are like this sometimes. They say things in kind of a tricky way. Not that, yes, I'm going to do what you said, but yes, I understand what you're saying, right? Prabhuji knows, right? So he's a veteran. So later, Balaram called for Krishna. And Balaram said, look, I know you. You want to go to Kaliya's place. He said, okay, I'm the big brother. I make rules here. You can go. But just one thing, don't go in the water. And Krishna told his big brother, I understand. Yes, I understand. And that day, a very sunny day, Krishna set off with the cows. And it's described that the boys were going ahead and the cows were following them. Excuse me, the cows were going ahead. The boys were following the cows. And Krishna was coming along behind them. That day was a very hot day. And the cows were searching for some water. They were searching for some grass. And then in the distance, they saw some very lush grass where they hadn't been for a long time before. And you can imagine where they went. The cows went there, and they immediately started drinking water from the Jamuna. And that water, which was so poisonous that Harivamsa Purana says that for 8 miles, 1 yojana, on either side of the Jamuna, all the birds were dropping dead. Sometimes it said there was green grass. I don't know how that's. And other times it said everything was dead there. The fumes were so potent that birds would be flying overhead and they would fall down dead from the fumes of Kaliya. It was such a toxic place. And the cows, somehow they drank the water there and they fell over dead. And then a little after, the boys came there. And what did the boys do? Of course, they drank the water, right? Of course. Why would they? It doesn't make sense, does it? If you see a bunch of dead cows laying around and there's a bunch of dead animals and birds and trees, and you're going to drink the water from there? Sanatana Goswami explains in Brihad Vaishnava Toshani, he says that they wanted to commit suicide because they felt we failed in our service. And I'd rather die than fail in my service to Krishna. My service is to take care of the cows. And I know how dear those cows are to Krishna. And all the cows are lying here dead now. How can we face Krishna in this situation? So they began lamenting like anything. So then at the end, Krishna, he shows up. And finding them laying there apparently dead, Krishna began to lament. And Jiva Goswami describes his words in Gopal Champu. Yagava kaludevata brajasadam asmakam uchaistaram ye bhalascha sadaiva jiva tulitaste mi vipana puraha hahanta swayam asmi tat sahachara kim brataram mataram tatam sarvajanam chavachmi mama dik chapaliyata sahasam. Dik means the hell. Krishna began to condemn himself. And he said, Yagavaha kaludevata, that these cows, they're greater than the demigods. It's said that all 33 million demigods reside in the body of a cow. That's an ordinary cow. That's not the cows of Vrindavan, who once nursed Krishna like their son during the Brahma Vimohana Lila. And he said that these boys, they're even more than that. He said, Yabalascha sadaiva jiva tulitas teimi. These boys, they're equal to my life. Hanta. He's lamenting, what can I do? What am I going to say to their mothers? It's like a child when they do something bad. I broke Dad's guitar, or I did some terrible thing. How am I going to explain this? What am I going to say? Of course, it's not funny. In this case, this is a very, very sober thing. Krishna, how am I going to tell them? What am I going to say to them? Sadhava hridayam mayam, sadhanam hridayam tvaham manani tena janati naham tebya managapi. Krishna told Durvasa Muni, you should know the devotees. The devotees are my life. I can't live without the devotees. And I'm the life of my devotees. I don't know anything but my devotees. My devotees don't know anything but me. Jiva Goswami says that at that time, Krishna was looking down at the boys and cows. And Krishna, who was Atmaram and Atmakam, who was completely self-satisfied, the Santushtasatatam yogi, the completely self-satisfied yogi, Krishna began to cry. And his eyes, those tears came down and they landed on the boys. Those tears from the heart of Krishna, Krishna's heart melted, and Krishna's melted heart came out through his eyes in the form of his tears. It landed on those boys and those cows, and they brought them back to life. That was the life of those boys. The beautiful description by Jiva Goswami. So at that time, Krishna then began to embrace all the boys, but not everybody all at once. That's not so sweet. But he would only revive them one at a time. So it was a very, very intimate, very, very personal relationship. Krishna was embracing them one at a time. And this is Vrindavan. Vrindavan community means that we come together in a festival, but it's very, very personal. And that's a little difficult sometimes in our society, be honest, isn't it? I don't mean to cast any shade on anything, but it's a little difficult sometimes because we want to invite the public. But as soon as the public comes in, you have to put up signs, put your shoes here. Don't eat with your left hand. Don't come in here. This is a kitchen. Don't do this. Whereas when it's just a sweet, intimate family members, there's no signs. Everybody knows. Everybody takes up their services automatically, and it's very sweet and intimate. But when in such a situation you don't know everybody, it's a little difficult. It's a little difficult to speak when you don't know everybody present. Because Krishna Katha, by nature, is guyam akyati prichati. It's meant to be some confidential thing which is shared. 11.330, the Bhagavatam says, Paraspara anukatanam pavanam bhagavadyasa mito ratya mitas tushya nivita mita atmana. That Krishna Katha is meant to be paraspara, back and forth. It's not a rock concert on the stage. It's not a lecture in the university or a sermon in the church. But it's back and forth. It's a sangha of devotees. And Krishna Katha creates a sangha. So we learn that this principle about community from this pastime, that Krishna brought them back to life. The life of the boys was Krishna's compassion, Krishna's love for them. The life of the boys wasn't their rules and regulations that we were speaking about this morning. Krishna didn't think, oh wow, these guys, they're so good at mudras and mantras, I got to bring them back to life, it's really important. No, it was based on love. Krishna's personified love for those boys brought them back to life. That was their life. That's the life of the devotees. And we were reading this morning from Sanatana Goswami's commentary on 1047-59. And he was saying, speaking about Varnashram, and it's a point I didn't really bring out very much this morning, but we can develop a little further here. He spoke in that commentary how bhakti itself gives shelter. We usually think of Varnashram, it's a Varna ashram, it's a place where, it's an ashram. We have ashraya, I mentioned that this morning. We have some shelter, and I'm a brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasi, and if I act according to those principles and within the ashram that I'm in, I'm taking ashraya, shelter, and I'm protected. I'm protected as a wife or a husband, I'm protected as a brahmacharya or a sannyasi. According to my particular nature, that's the best thing for me. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that bhakti gives its own shelter by itself. A very amazing statement. And Srila Prabhupada exhibited this. And then, my humble perspective, Srila Prabhupada initially was telling devotees, there's a conversation in 1967 where the devotees said something to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada, this Varnashram thing, we got to follow all this stuff. And Prabhupada asked him a very interesting question. He said, were you practicing Varnashram before you came here? He said, no, Srila Prabhupada, we don't want to talk about what they were doing before they came in 1967 in America. And Prabhupada said, where did your good fortune come from? Your good fortune didn't come from Varnashram. Your good fortune came from the holy name. Your good fortune came from bhakti. Bhaktya sanjayate bhaktya. Bhakti gives bhakti. It's described in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam by Krishna to Uddhava. Bhakti gives bhakti. Bhakti stu bhagavad bhakta sangena parijayate. In the Brihanardiya Purana, it's also commented that bhakti comes from the devotee, because the devotee has that bhakti. They can give that bhakti. So bhakti is its own shelter. And that bhakti is the shelter of all the Brijbasis. And that bhakti, my humble opinion is that Srila Prabhupada saw this was a shelter for all the devotees in the early days of our movement. Because nobody had any qualification. They didn't even know which hand to eat with, or how to clean themselves after they pass, and so many things. They didn't know anything culturally. But they were taking shelter of bhakti in the form of the holy name. And that bhakti is a shelter. But then later on, perhaps when Srila Prabhupada saw, it happened a little later, perhaps coincidentally when the first devotees started going to India. I spoke with Prabhupada's disciple Jamuna about this. I had a particular question I always wanted to ask her. I didn't have so much association with her, but I'm very, very grateful for what I did have, a few hours. And I said, I have one question I always wondered. What happened? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, I read in Prabhupada Lilamrita in the early days, it was one big family. And in fact, everybody was wearing the same kind of cloth. The ladies were wearing saris, but it was yellow sheets, dyed yellow. The men were wearing dhotis, but it was dyed yellow cloth. It was the same cloth. And everybody was standing in the line for the bathroom. Even Prabhupada was waiting in the line for the bathroom. And sometimes the men would lead kirtan, sometimes the ladies would lead kirtan, sometimes the ladies would give class, sometimes the men would give class. I said, so what happened? Where did things change? I think she liked the question, actually. And she told me, she said that when the first devotees went to India, to Mayapur, and they had no place to stay, they stayed in the Gaudiya Mutt. And with all respect to the Gaudiya Mutt, those are our brothers and cousins, and we also love them. But they came back and they said, hey, we've been doing it all wrong. And they started speaking about the cultural principles that they learned there, which are not the principles that Srila Prabhupada was stressing on in America at that time. And we spoke about that this morning. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Alochagata. He says that there's three different types of reasons why people become sectarian. And the first one is Alochagata, and that is because they like different types of dress. In India, in South India, they don't wear kurtas very much. They just have a chadar wrapped over their body. In South India, the ladies don't cover their heads. In Gujarat, they cover their heads. In Orissa, in the villages, the ladies don't wear a choli. They just wrap a cloth around themselves. In other places, they dress differently in different places. And someone who's attached to the particular dress, they'll criticize and say, only our dress is a good dress. Like that's a Lochakagata. Lochakagata refers to the different rituals and ceremonies which are given. And I mentioned that a little this morning too, how we recently went to a wedding, a Brijbasi wedding in Mathura, and the ceremonies were different than what we've seen in Orissa and West Bengal traditionally. So there's a little different rituals in different places. And the third is Alochanagata, which is the food is different. And some of the externals are different. And the way people, he mentions the way people take shelter of brahmachari or sannyas, or vanaprastha, grihastha, that's a little different in different places. Those are different designations. These are different things which cause sectarianism. So in Vrindavan, the shelter is Krishna's love. In Vrindavan, the shelter is bhakti. And this is my humble suggestion that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to create Vrindavan villages where the shelter is bhakti. But because we couldn't really get it, and because we were really enamored with what was going on in India, when we went there, the early devotees, and they said, hey, we're doing it all wrong. And they came back and they said, all the women are supposed to stand in the back. And the ladies are not supposed to lead kirtan or give class or anything. And that's when the change began. Jamuna explained to me, which makes perfect historical sense. And there's a long history after that. One of the things that she mentioned to me incidentally while we're on that topic was that Srila Prabhupada used to regularly ask her to lead kirtan and sometimes speak. She was a very shy speaker. She didn't like it. But Prabhupada sometimes would insist on it, and she would do the best she can. Actually, she was a very powerful speaker. And even when during the big Pandal programs they were having in Bombay, Prabhupada was having her sitting right next to him on the stage. He's a sannyasi, hardcore Gaudiya sannyasi in saffron with a danda, maybe no danda, but on the stage with a Western Mataji sitting next to him. And Prabhupada would ask her to sing and to speak oftentimes. So one such day when the program was beginning, Jamuna was going forward to take her place on the stage, and one of the sannyasis stopped her. And he said, what are you doing? And Jamuna told me about this person. She said, well, I'm going to sit on the stage next to Srila Prabhupada. And he said, you're a woman. He said, don't you see all these ladies? You should be standing in the back like them. And Jamuna felt a little hurt, but she wasn't like a wrestler or something like that, a boxer or something. She's going to fight with the guy. So she humbly went along with it. And she said that during his talk, Srila Prabhupada kept looking over to the place where Jamuna was usually sitting. And she wasn't there. And then later, after the program finished, and Jamuna saw Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada called her over and kind of jokingly he said, oh, you don't like me anymore? And Jamuna said, no, Srila Prabhupada, well, I love you. And Prabhupada said, then why didn't you come? And then Jamuna said, well, Srila Prabhupada, this devotee, he told me this thing. And when Jamuna said this to me, she really conveyed, I feel, the feeling of Prabhupada. Prabhupada didn't say anything, but he just looked very sad. And he didn't make any comments, didn't explain anything. He didn't chastise that devotee. He didn't say, you're wrong, I want Jamuna to sit here. He could have, but he didn't do that. He was just quiet. And Jamuna didn't offer any thoughts on it either. I've thought about that personally, and my personal feeling is that I think perhaps Srila Prabhupada knew that if he would have chastised them, it would have been very embarrassing for them, because they have this male ego, as we know about. And also they were his main instruments, and especially in India, the men, it was easier for people to listen to the men in that culture than the ladies, and Prabhupada needed them. So perhaps Prabhupada felt he just had to be quiet, and he couldn't say anything. So around that time, the devotees started saying, well, you know, we have to, like the men and the women, they have to be kept separate. And around that time, a little after, some of the men even came up with the suggestion that Prabhupada, you know, the women are Maya, and they shouldn't live in the temples, because they weren't. In India, in the Gaudiya Math, they weren't living there. And the devotees really wanted to know what's the real deal about bhakti. And they were thinking, we're not really practicing properly here in the West, we're just kind of monkeys, and Prabhupada gave us something, but now we've gone to the Gaudiya Math and we know more. We see the way they're doing things, we should do that. This is exactly what Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about in the beginning of Krishna Samhita, that saintly persons, acharyas, they come and they see the people in an area and they speak certain principles to them. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur sometimes had ladies speak in certain places, but not in the villages, because they couldn't relate to that. He didn't allow ladies to live in the temple because that was scandalous at that time in West Bengal for that to go on. People just couldn't accept that. But Srila Prabhupada, when he came to the West, he gave ladies second initiation, he allowed them to live in the temples with them, and so many things. And we may think that, well, this is something Prabhupada just watered it down, and the real deal is we should do like this in India. Perhaps, I'll let you be the judge of that yourselves. But another possibility, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks on, is that Srila Prabhupada was speaking according to that place and time to those particular persons. And Bhaktivinoda says this is the nature of the Acharya. That he speaks two things, Tatkalika and Sarvakalika. Tatkalika means something which is for a particular time and place, whereas Sarvakalika means something for all time and all place. To give an example in this regard, ladies living in a temple or not living in a temple, that's Tatkalika. That's time, place, and circumstance. They may not. In West Bengal, that just wasn't done because it was considered scandalous. But in America, it was the opposite. It's scandalous if the ladies were not given the same opportunity as the men. So Prabhupada gave a different instruction in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. That's Tatkalika. Sarvakalika, something which is for all time and all places, means the chanting of the holy names. That should be done by everyone in all circumstances, in whatever melody you want, with whatever instruments you want, whatever ragas, whatever time of day. Everyone should chant the Hare Krishna mantra. That's very, very important. So the point being brought out here is that the shelter of Vrindavan is bhakti itself. And in this case, Krishna's love for the boys and the cows. And as his personified love for them came from his melted heart through his eyes in the form of his tears, they fell down on one boy at a time. And Krishna would have a very joyous reunion with that boy. He came back from the dead. Wow. What a reunion. Can you imagine? A dear friend, one of your children or something, Hare Krishna, dies. How you feel as a parent. And then all of a sudden they come back to life, and how you would cry, and how ecstatic you would be, and how ecstatic they would be, and you would just be holding each other and crying and looking at each other. This is what was going on with Krishna and the boys. And it went on with each and every boy in an individual way. And then Krishna again began reviving the cows in the same way, one at a time. So it was also a very, very sweet individual reunion with each individual cow. And then the cows began licking Krishna's body. And at that time, Krishna, he was thinking about Kaliya. And he became a little angry, a little upset. Because Kaliya has done this very terrible thing. He's hurt my friends. Kaliya may hurt myself, I don't mind. Kaliya may even pollute the Jamuna. That's very bad. But when he kills my friends and the cows, I can't tolerate that. So Krishna at that time, Jiva Goswami and Gopal Champu says that Krishna hid his feelings of anger and he said, hey friends, look. He said, that wicked snake Kaliya, he's living in his lake. And because of him, the whole place has become poisonous and all the birds flying overhead are dead. In Krishna book, Srila Prabhupada comments that at that point, Krishna told the boys, he said, see, there's a Kadamba tree. And somehow this tree is still alive. I'll tell you guys what. You just wait down here just for a few minutes. I'll be right back. Don't worry. Krishna told him that. I'm just going to climb up in the tree and so I get a nice view of what's going on. And I'm going to see what's happening. Now, different acharyas, Prabhupada comments this in Krishna book too. He says that some say that it was because of the touch of Krishna's feet that Kadamba tree came back to life. Jiva Goswami and Gopal Champu says that previously Garuda, knowing what was going to happen, sprinkled little amrit. And that's a long story how Garuda stole the nectar from the demigods, but he had this amrit, this nectar, sprinkled little balls or something there in the middle of the water. And Prabhupada in Krishna book, he says that the sound of that noise was intolerable for Kaliya, and he could understand someone was attacking his home. And so he came out, and Jiva Goswami says that as Kaliya came out, he saw Krishna with a big smile on his face. And Krishna's just there in the water going back and forth. The Bhagavatam says that Fana Sahasraha, that Kaliya had 1,000 heads. Wow. I sometimes think that this concept of the dragon, the fire-breathing dragon, probably came from Kaliya. Because Kaliya was breathing the fire in the form of poison and looked like a dragon with 1,000 heads. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says that it was 100 of those heads which are the most prominent. And in Laghu Vaishnav Toshani, there's an interesting point Jiva Goswami brings out. He says he calls Kaliya Chakshu Shrava Chakshu. This is the nature of a snake. A snake is Chakshu Shrava Chakshu. That a snake, it doesn't have any ears. So it sees, its hearing is going through its eyes. Or as they say in America, there's a place called Missouri, they call it the show me state. And they have it written on their license plates, the show me state. Seeing is believing. Right? I don't believe it, you have to show me. It's a kind of envious attitude. And that's the attitude that Kaliya had. Whereas a saintly person, Shutekshitapata, 3.9.11 of the Bhagavatam describes, Shutekshitapata, this is the path of hearing. Right? They hear and they understand. But Kaliya would only believe what he saw. So he's Chakshu, Shrava, Chakshu. His Shrava, his hearing, was just through his eyes. In other words, he's a Rohapanta. There's a Rohapanta and Avarohapanta. A Rohapanta means the devotees. So that's Shutekshitapata, the path of descending hearing. Avarohapanta is Kaliya. He's trying to go up on his own, trying to understand things on his own. At that time, Kaliya saw that Krishna was very, very beautiful. And at that time, Kaliya wrapped his coils around Krishna and he began to bite him on the chest. And our acharyas say different things in their commentaries, but Sanatana Goswami in Brihad Vaishnav Toshani, he says this thing which I remember reading, I'm like, wow. And there was a little note, the first translation I found of it years ago was from Gopi Pranadana Prabhu. And he made a little note on the tree. He said, I don't know why Sanatana Goswami is saying this. Nobody else says this. He says that when Kaliya was wrapping around Krishna, he was embracing him out of love. And when he was biting him on the chest, he was kissing him. Okay, that's not what any of our other acharyas say, and that's not what any Puranas or anything say. How do we understand that? Jiva Goswami says that Yogamaya produced a shield for Krishna's body. In the Brahma Vivarta Purana, it's actually said that Kaliya swallowed Krishna. And that Krishna began burning in his throat, and Kaliya had to spit him out. In the Vishnu Purana, in the Harivangsha Puranas, it said that there were many, many snakes there, because Kaliya has lots of friends. Criticism is very popular. If you don't believe me, there's this thing you can join on the internet. It's called Facebook, and you'll see. It's really popular to criticize people. That's a very, very popular thing. So he has lots of friends, and they were all attacking Krishna. They were all biting him at the same time. And at that time, Ananda Vrindavan Champu Kavi Karnapur says that Kaliya began to have some doubt. Who is this boy? How did he do this? And how did he kill my friend, the Gasura? There's also a snake, in such an effortless way. But because Kaliya was so envious, he couldn't recognize Krishna. The Bhagavatam says that Krishna at that time was a drishta chestam. Drishta chestam says it means that he wasn't moving. He was just accepting, okay, Kaliya, go ahead and do what you want. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that Krishna basically told Kaliya, he said, okay, give me your best shot. And Kaliya did what he went. And then Krishna said, okay, you showed me your strength. Now let me show you a little of my strength. And then Krishna began to expand himself. But prior to that, the boys went running back to tell the residents of Vrindavan. And someone may question at this point why they didn't commit suicide themselves. Kavi Karnapur explains because, first of all, they were frozen in place. They couldn't move. They were so stunned to see Krishna in the coils of Kaliya. And they were crying and crying. They fell down on the ground. And secondly, Jiva Goswami says that Krishna kept them alive because they had a service to do. They had to go and inform Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj and the other Bijbasis. So they went running back, and at that time the Bhagavatam, we're trying to make this very short, there's many very fascinating points. There's so many inauspicious omens both on the land and the sky, which indicate a lot of different things coming from the demigods. But Sanatana Goswami says that, he says an interesting thing in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, that Krishna kind of sent like a telepathic message, maybe an email or something, I don't know, to some old guy who was on the bank of the Jamuna, that he should go and give the message to the Brijbasis, because Krishna knew they may not believe the boys. And the boys are so shocked, maybe they won't even be able to speak about it anyway. So that's described there. And other literatures describe that it's the boys who went there. In the Sri Krishna Vijay, it's said that the boys went running to Yashoda and Rohini, and they said, listen, listen. Stop what you're doing. Listen to us. And they started, this morning, we went to the bank of the Jamuna. The cows, they were laying there dead. They drank this water. We drank the water. Krishna brought us back to life. And then Krishna told us, it's just going to be 1 minute. And he climbed up in this tree, and then you know what he did? He jumped into the Jamuna. And the boys said, we're afraid Krishna's dead. The last thing we saw was that Kaliya was wrapped around him, and there was blood all over in the Jamuna. Now, can you imagine what message that is to Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj and everyone? Balaram was there, and Balaram, when he heard all this, it's an interesting thing. Jiva Goswami and Gopal Champu, Balaram, he smiled. He thought, maybe I should laugh. Because Balaram was thinking to himself, previously, when I manifest my form as Ananta Sesh, Krishna doesn't play with me. But now he's playing with this insignificant worm, Kaliya. Well, he's playing with him, but he doesn't play with me as Ananta Sesh. So he wanted to laugh, but that's really not very cool to do right now. If I laugh, it's going to really disturb everybody. They're going to really be upset with me. But he smiled. And that smile was very, very beautiful. That smile gave some life, it gave some hope to Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj and the gopis. They could see, oh, Balaram's not upset, he's smiling. Balaram must know something. He couldn't speak it, they weren't ready. And then Balaram, he told Rohini, everybody was getting ready to run. But Balaram, he told Rohini, his mother, Mata, you should stay back. You don't go. Why is he telling her that? This Kaliya Damana Lila is significant because we know in a few minutes all the residents of Vrindavan were gathered there together, and it's one of only two pastimes in Braj Lila when all the residents of Vrindavan are gathered together with Krishna at the same time. The other pastime is Govardhan Lila. And the difference between these two pastimes is that Kaliya Damana Lila, everybody's present there, but there's some horror, there's some fright. Whereas in Govardhan Lila, they're feeling happy. They're having a big party underneath Govardhan Hill. Whereas when they come and they see Krishna in the quails of Kaliya, they're feeling very, very disturbed. So why Balaram told Rohini to stay back? He said, Mother, Krishna probably is going to be hungry when he comes back. Actually, according to Kavi Karnapur, they didn't come back until the next day. That's another story, what happened after Kaliya Damana Lila. They didn't return until the next day. And Rohini was told by Balaram to wait. And so then they all began to follow Krishna's footprints, and they were stumbling and running there. The gopis were going there. And the residents of Vrindavan, they all arrived there, and they saw in a distance Krishna wrapped up in the coils of Kaliya, and Krishna wasn't moving. And the boys were standing there like statues. And Nanda and Yashoda, they were so much in anxiety. They said, what happened? What happened to Krishna? And the boys couldn't say anything. They were just standing there. And then it really put Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj into great, great anxiety. So the ladies began falling down on the ground like trees that were cut off. And Nanda Maharaj began crying out, my son, my son. And the gopis of Vrindavan, they were just crying and making the ground muddy with their tears. And then at that time, Nanda and Yashoda, when they got up from the ground, because they fell to the ground unconscious, immediately they started crying, and just instinctively they started running into the Jamuna. And all the residents of Vrindavan then began to follow them. Whether they were running into the Jamuna to save Krishna, or they were running into the Jamuna to commit suicide in separation from Krishna, we can't really say. Either way, their feelings were very, very intense. And Jiva Goswami describes that, or Sanatana Goswami, Vaishnava Toshini describes that Balaram at that time held them all back. Some of them, he just glanced at them. Hey, don't do that, right? You know that look, right? Sometimes you give a look and she knows, okay, all right, okay, Dad. Just takes a look, right? Some of them he said, hey, don't go there. Some of them he spoke words. And some of them, I think probably Nanda Maharaj and a few others, he had to grab them physically and stop them. In these three ways, Balaram was holding them back. And at that time, Sanatana Goswami in Brihad Bhagavatamrita says that Balaram began to cry with great emotion. And he appealed to Krishna, and he said, Ete na vaikunta nibasi parshada navanaraste na chayadava api goloka loka bhavareka jivana nashyanchaksakya bhagavan mayitvam. Balaram said, hey Krishna, these are not your devotees in Vaikuntha, the Vaikuntha Basis. These are not your associates in the spiritual world. They're not the Vanaras, the monkeys in Ram Lila. These are not the members of the Yadu dynasty. These are your devotees in Vrindavan. And they have no other life but you. You're their only life. And there's nothing I can do to save them. Pranarviyukta na bhavanti yavat tavad vinodham karuna tvajaitam Krishnan yata goshta janaika bandho gantasi shokam mridula swabhavaha. He says, hey, Midula Swabhava, Krishna. You have this swabhava, this nature, Midula, you're very, very gentle. Oh, soft-hearted Krishna. He said, give up this game, or your devotees are going to die. And my dear Krishna, you're the only friend. Krishnanyata Goshta Janaika Bandho, you're the only friend of the residents of Vrindavan. If you don't do something very quick, then your gentle heart is going to be full of pain. And it was at that time that Krishna turned to Kaliya and smiled and said, you showed me a little of your strength. Now I'll show you a little of mine. And Kaliya and Krishna expanded himself a little bit. So Balaram, first of all, in this pastime, Balaram is Adi Guru. He's the original guru. Kaliya represents criticism. And it poisons the Jamuna. It poisons the internet, which is something which is life for a lot of devotees. And sometimes we feel like, I got to jump in and I got to save Krishna. I got to do something, right? But Balaram said, no, don't do that. It's not going to work. And he stopped them. He stopped them from entering into that place of poison. And he appealed to Krishna. Krishna, you have to do something. And at that time, it's described in the Bhagavatam that Krishna began to circle around Kaliya. And the Bhagavatam describes that because of Krishna circling around Kaliya, Kaliya became tired and weak. Does that make a lot of sense? Any men here are like into wrestling? It's okay, you don't have to tell it. But, or boxing or something. Men like that kind of stuff. Have we ever heard of a wrestler who became weakened because the other boxer fellow was circling around him? Does that make sense, Prabhuji? No. No. Doesn't make sense to me either. But it said that about Krishna. So what does that mean? Krishna was circling around him. Kridan amum parisahasar yetta kagendro. The Bhagavatam 16th chapter describes that he began circling around Kaliya, and Kaliya had no chance to bite him. He was looking for a place to bite him, but because Krishna was circling around him, he couldn't do it. And then evam paribrahma hattojasam. He lost his strength. Kaliya had lost his strength because he was circling around him. Some Vaishnavas have said that Krishna was going the opposite direction of Kaliya. He's going the opposite direction of fault finding. Krishna was, as we'll later hear, Krishna, after he defeated Kaliya, the residents of Vrindavan drank the water. The same water which the cows and boys died drinking, the same water become nectar by the touch of Krishna's body. So the Brijbasis were not able to solve the problem on their own. And Balaram, Adi Guru, stopped them. You don't enter into the water. This is something Krishna has to do. Krishna gave the solution. The solution was just circling around Kaliya. It made him weak. The solution is we take shelter of Krishna. And we just tolerate those nonsense things. And there's many different descriptions. Let's see here if I can find something for you. Just real quick. Oops. Yeah, right there. We printed some years ago in our Krishna Katamrita Bindu email magazine, little shout out for our service that we do. We printed a collection of statements from different Vedic literature speaking about the nature of fault finding. And I'd like to share with you two statements from the Mahabharata. Akrosha pariravabyam vihingsantya buddha buddhan vakta papamupadate kshamamana vimuchate. That someone who's ignorant, they try to hurt someone by criticizing. But a wise person, who's buddhan, he tolerates that, and by tolerating that and forgiving the person, the critic, all of his bad qualities go away. He becomes freed from them. And a little later, this is a discussion between Vidura and Dhritarashtra. Akrusha mana nakroshan manya eva titikshitaha. Titikshita, the tolerance is mentioned. Akrostaram nidahati sukritam chasya vindati. That the person who's being criticized shouldn't reciprocate, shouldn't criticize back, because the pain that you feel will take all the good qualities from the critic, and the good qualities will come to you, and all your bad qualities will go to him. That's a principle of bhakti. It's a principle of Vrindavan villages. It's not necessary for us to take shelter of our own strength to fight against Kaliya, to fight against criticism. We just take shelter of Krishna. And if you only take shelter of Krishna, everything is okay. That doesn't mean that we can tolerate when someone's criticizing the devotees or someone's criticizing Krishna. But what does it mean when it says that we should make them mum? Sometimes we should defeat them. Sometimes we defeat them, but they don't become mum. They just keep speaking and speaking. Really, I've defeated you. It's like having an argument with someone, and finally they're not listening. You just take a hammer, bam, you hit him in the head with a hammer. You say, there, I hit you in the head with a hammer. And you say, no, you didn't. How do you have a discussion with someone like that? Right? There's some people who are just so crazy. So that person, in that case, better you cut out their tongue. But that might not be very helpful because you'll cause problems for the devotees. You may end up going to jail for the rest of your life or something. Or you commit suicide. That's also not encouraged. So the only other option is you go away. You leave that place. And we see generally that's what Jiva Goswami did. That's what, Rupa and Sanatana Goswami did when they were hearing some criticism in Vrindavan by one big Digvijay Pandit. They just left that place. Let him think what he wants. We'll even sign your paper, your Vijay Patra. You won the argument. It's okay. Now, let us do our bhajan, because that's what's important. Taking shelter of Krishna, sarva karma krita hoy, will solve all problems. Papinam papagananam ya karoti naradamaha astitve tulya papaste mityatve dviguna nripa. It's described in the Naradiya Purana, in the first canto, chapter 14, that someone who's a papagananam. Papagananam means literally someone who's going around with a pen and they're writing down all the bad things that everybody did. That's a papagananam. And gananam means to count all the pop. And karoti, he's doing that thing. Now, astitve, if what he sees is true, then guess what? Tulya papaste. You get to share the reaction with that person. You criticize, poor Gaudahari Prabhu, the guy did this thing. He didn't come to Mangalarti for 2 days in a row. He's completely out of it. I know this. Now, if it's true what you said, then you get half the reaction for yourself. And if it's not true, mityatve, then dviguna nripa, you get double the reaction that the other person would have gotten for the fault that you're ascribing to them, that you're imagining to them. So Krishna went the other direction. Krishna circled around Kaliya, and Kaliya became weak. As one sadhu told me, he said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave us a secret in the Trinada Pi Sunichena verse, a secret for Nam Bhajan. That if you are manina manadena, you give all respect to everybody else, they'll leave you alone. They won't take you very seriously, because you're not fighting back, you're not arguing or anything. And then you can do your bhajan. Kirtaniya sadahari. You won't be disturbed. So then at that time, Krishna, hearing the words of Balaram, he circled around Kaliya. And then the Bhagavatam says, Akila kala adiguru nanartha. That original guru of all the arts, Krishna, he jumped up onto the heads of Kaliya and he began to dance. And diktan, diktan, dikitan, diktan, diktan, dikitan, Krishna began to dance according to all the different tals and things. And it's a long pastime. Kaliya's hoods were being pushed down. The demigods began to sing and dance in the same tal and the same meters that Krishna was dancing in. And Kaliya, all of his poison was driven out. And then when his poison was driven out, he came to his consciousness. And he began to offer some prayers to Krishna. Krishna at that time, Sanatana Goswami says, he brought the gopis onto Kaliya's hoods and they did a Ras Lila. That was the first Ras Lila. Not at Vamsivat, but on the heads of Kaliya. Krishna danced with the gopis. Now you may say, what about Nanda and Yashoda? His mother and father were right there. And Sanatana Goswami says they were so shocked by the whole situation. They just couldn't even see or understand what was going on. And Krishna's up there dancing with the gopis. And then Krishna, he heard the prayers of Kaliya's wives, and then he told Kaliya, you have to leave. You have to go somewhere else. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that Kaliya had to leave because although he got so much mercy from Krishna, and that meant that mercy of Krishna is mentioned in a number of places in different literatures. I mean, Krishna put his footprints on Kaliya's heads. He did the Ras Lila with the gopis on Kaliya's heads. But Krishna drove him out of the Jamuna because Kaliya had not taken shelter of any of the Brijbasis. So he couldn't stay. And Krishna drove him out, you go somewhere else. And so then Kaliya, he went to Ramanaka Dweep, where he originally had stayed. And let's see if we can come to that point. So I want to try now to kind of synthesize some of our questions in a real quick way, because I know we need to finish in about 2 or 3 minutes, and it's going to be a little hard for me. I studied this pastime in the Brahma-Vaivarta Purana especially, and also in the, the Garga Samhita, and a few different literatures. And there's some interesting things which we found there. In the Brahma-Vaivarta Purana, it said there that Kaliya was a devotee. In fact, Kaliya was initiated devotee. He was initiated by who? Who was his guru? Anantasesh, who's Balaram. Now maybe that's one of the reasons why it says Vina Ramena, without Balaram. Because Balaram had some affection. He's my disciple. And he really doesn't want to see him getting messed up by Krishna. Krishna smashing his teeth and beating him up and like that. He didn't want to see that thing. He came later to stop the Brijbasis, but Balaram didn't go initially in the same way that Balaram didn't go to Kurukshetra, because he was attached to who? Duryodhan, his disciple. He had some affection for Duryodhan. And that's another discussion too, why that is there. It's described in the Brahma-Vaivarta Purana that Kaliya, when he was fighting with Garuda before he came to Vrindavan, that the way how did he survive a fight with Garuda? He survived because he was chanting his Krishna mantra in his mind. But he was defeated by Kaliya because, because Kaliya was a neophyte devotee. He had some envy and things in his heart, like some of us, okay, right? Isn't it? We're a little like that also. And this is how Kaliya was able to come and live for many, many yugas in Vrindavan. Did we ever think about that? Our acharyas have said in Harivamsa Purana, it says that Kaliya was living for many yugas in the Jamuna. How did he get to do that? And how did he get to have darshan of Krishna? Because he was a devotee. Just flying over some points here from my notes. But there's a particular point. In the Garga Samhita, there's some mention, very interesting thing. Yes. During the Swayambhuva Manvantara, there were 2 rishis named Vedasira Muni and Asvasira Muni. Now, Vedasira Muni, he was living in the ashram, Bhrigu Muni's ashram in the Vindhya Mountains. And one day this other fellow shows up, this other rishi, to do his austerities and his bhajan there. And Vedasira Muni said, excuse me, I was here first. This is my, but it's not like sometimes we see the brahmacharis like that in the ashram. Prabhu, this is my corner. It's just a corner of the room. But somehow it's so important to me, this corner, that I have to have this particular corner. So Vedasira Muni and Asvasira Muni, they became very angry like that. And Asvasira Muni said, look, there's so many places you can, this is not your place. This belongs to everyone. It belongs to Mahavishnu. Belongs to the Lord. And you're angry for no reason, so I curse you. You're hissing and making a sound like a snake, so you should become a snake. So then Vedasira Muni, you're cursing me to become... So Vedasira Muni counter-cursed him that you're going to become a crow. And all of a sudden they realize, like sometimes 2 brahmacharis start arguing in the ashram. Should we stop here? Okay, I'll be quick, I'm sorry. The 2 brahmacharis are arguing. Sometimes they realize, actually, this is really stupid. Why are we arguing like this? You're my brother. And they kind of stop. And then they realize, wow, we kind of like cursed each other, which is a pretty serious thing. And at that time, Lord Vishnu came there and said, look, you guys, it's okay. You're both my devotees. I like both of you. He says, but I got to tell you, I can't take away your curses. He says, you 2 are like my 2 arms at my body. I can make my words false, but I can't take away your curse. So Vedasira, you're going to become Kaliya. But don't worry, I'll put my feet on your head. And because of that, you won't have to worry about Garuda. And Asvasira, it's okay, you'll become a crow, but you'll become Kakabashundi. And for those of you who don't know, Kakabashundi spoke the Ram Lila. You may be a crow, but you'll have transcendental knowledge. And then that Vedasira Muni, let's look here. Here it is. It's described that during Chakshushamanvantar, Prajapati Daksha gave his 11 beautiful daughters in marriage to Kashyapa Muni. Tasam Kadushchaya Shrestha Sudyaiva Rohini Smita. Kadru was the best of all of them. And that Kadru, she's known today, Tasam Kadushchaya Shrestha Sudyaiva Rohini Smita. She's known today as Rohini. Kadru became Rohini. And it was that Kadru who became the mother of Kaliya. So that also makes sense, doesn't it? Balaram told his mother, Mom, you don't come. You don't want to see this because that's your boy. That's your boy there. You'll recognize him from a previous life or something. That's your boy, Kaliya. So Balaram held her back. And Kaliya got so much mercy because he's a disciple of Anantasesh, Balaram. And he had this enmity with Garuda. So he went to Ramanaka Dweep. The last question I had, I don't know if you remember that year at Govardhan Retreat, we'd figured out answers to so many things in this pastime. But one thing I couldn't figure out is how it is that Krishna telling somebody to leave Vrindavan is mercy. I really had a problem with that. And that morning, I remember I was supposed to speak. This is our last session. I was walking around Govardhan Hill and chanting japa, and all of a sudden, an answer came to my mind. And I spoke that answer that day to the devotees, and they seemed very satisfied, but I wasn't 100% satisfied. And I'll tell you the answer in a minute. So I decided, because it was just my personal thought, and I should get it confirmed with some higher authority. So I went to see Srila Prabhupada's disciple, Radha Govinda Maharaj, who had been studying Bhagavatam, has been studying Bhagavatam since he was like 5 years old. He was supposed to go to school every morning, and he would just sneak away and go to the forest. And there was one sadhu there reading the Bhagavatam, and he would just sit and read Bhagavatam with him all day. That's how he grew up. He's read the Bhagavatam maybe hundreds of times. He knows the Bhagavatam. So I went to him, and I didn't tell him my conclusion, but I just asked him the question. How do we understand Krishna driving Kaliya out from Braj is mercy? And in my happiness, he gave the exact answer that I gave. He said, in the same way that Srila Prabhupada brought his disciples to Vrindavan and then sent them back to preach. So think about that. Kaliya, he's from Ramanaka Dweep. And if you go, you're living in Goloka Dham. Now let's pretend there's no email or anything. It's a little different these days. But you go to Vrindavan, and you're in Vrindavan for 2 months or a year or something, and you come back to Goloka Dham. What does everybody say when you come back? They say, hey, Gaudahari, come on, tell us what happened. What's it like in Vrindavan? How's so? Did you see Guru Maharaj there? Did you see this? They'll be asking so many questions like that. That always happens, right? So Kali has been gone from Ramanaka Dweep for a long, long time. That Ramanaka Dweep, Prabhupada said it was Fiji. And he said that Kali is still there today. So Kali went back to Ramanaka Dweep, and definitely they're going to ask, what happened? Where have you been? And what's Kali going to do? He's going to say, sit down. I've got a story to tell you. There's a place called Vrindavan, and there's a boy named Krishna. Isn't it? 100%. He's going to speak that thing which is the most powerful in his heart. And what can be more powerful in his heart than seeing the pastimes, speaking about the pastimes of Krishna, which he saw. Now, another amazing thing, which we're surmising, but it's very logical surmise, that who's going to be present there also in that assembly? Now, here's a question for you well-read persons. Who goes to Ramanaka Dweep every day for a fast food lunch?
Oh, this is a...
Garuda goes there every day. It's kind of like his McDonald's or something. He goes there to eat a few snakes. They have some arrangement made like that. So Garuda's going to go there, 100%. He goes there every day. And he's going to go, now all of a sudden there's something different. There's a big assembly. And what's Garuda going to do? He's going to land him, and he's going to hear, hey, well, he's speaking Krishna Katha. And what's he going to do? He's going to listen, 100%. And that's the nature of Krishna Katha. The Krishna Katha creates community. Krishna Katha is that form of bhakti is a unity which brings us all together. And I want to speak more about that in our next few sessions. Tomorrow morning we're going to speak about Kaliya Damana Lila. And the fault, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that Kaliya represents Ami Bodho Bhakta O Acharya, that I'm a great devotee and an Acharya. This is the fault which keeps Kaliya from entering into Vrindavan and which spoils the whole mood of the Vrindavan village. We'll speak something about that tomorrow. And then I think the next talk we're going to speak something about God's idiots. And it's from a poem, English translation of something written by Nam Alwar about God's idiots. And also something in line with what we've been speaking about how, what is the meaning of kirtan and how that kirtan should be unmotivated. And then it gives real happiness. And only an idiot does something like that. We'll speak something more about that. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know if we have time for any discussion. Is that okay? It's really, actually, we recently did a series of talks in Lithuania at the Baltic Summer Festival. It was kind of a community building, we built it like that, a community building seminar. And we wanted to have long talks with the devotees, again, because we had so much we wanted to say. We didn't have so much discussion, but it's really very powerful if there's paraspara, there's some back and forth, because that builds community. And that's why we want to come together and have this Krishna Katha, because we want to get bhakti from the devotees, because bhakti stu bhagavad bhakta sangena parijayate. Bhakti comes from the devotees. And we get that bhakti when we please the devotees by doing a nice kirtan. By speaking some Krishna Katha, the devotees become pleased. And hopefully the speaker or the kirtan leader also has something to share as well. So that's the foundation of our community. And as we want to say in our God's Idiots discussion, the connection, something between Krishna Katha and Krishna Nam. Something more about that. So does anybody have any reflections or questions, comments? Prabhuji?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just would like to make 2 comments.
Okay.
You asked a question, does it make sense that Kaliya would get tired when Krishna is walking around him? So actually, I think about that, and it does make a sense, because a boxer or a fighter, there's 2 things that will happen. If a fighter is very expert, they will tease the opponent. Mm-hmm. And to draw them out, which means that they will,
they'll expend their energy.
Right, to draw them out, right, like that. And then just kind of avoiding. Uh-huh. And then the other thing is that another style of fighting is where you draw the opponent out in the sense that you entice them to make a strike. And then you use that energy actually to lock them up and to counter.
Uh-huh.
That's all.
Nice. That's a great comment. Thank you. That's the science of fighting. And thank you, Hare Krishna. And we see in this case, I still stand by my purport that I want to offer to that Kaliya represents fault finding. And Krishna in particular, Krishna's fighting against him is in the form of Krishna's name. Krishna himself. When we take shelter of Krishna, that's the solution for things. Anybody else, any reflections, comments, questions? Go to Hari Prabhu, you want to share anything?
I came a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but maybe. Sorry. I always wonder, some devotees, okay, Harinam, 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 Kevalam, chanting, and someone say Bhagavatam, 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 this is the way, and where is the truth?
How do we reconcile these 2 statements?
What is actually?
Idam Puranam Bhagavatam Nama. It's described in the something we want to talk about in our God's Idiots discussion. How this Bhagavatam is a Nam Purana. And either Anvya Vratireka Yat Syat Sarvata Sarvata, either directly or indirectly, the entire Bhagavatam is speaking about Krishna Nam. There's a need for that. And as we'll speak more, I will repeat this thing a little later. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, it just says you can't separate Krishna from his Sarup Shakti Radha. So also we can't separate Krishna Nam from Krishna Katha. Krishna Nam, Abhinatvanamanaminam, is Krishna, and Krishna Katha is Radha. Because it's Krishna Katha that helps us to understand Krishna Nam. And there's some more thoughts about it, but briefly like that. Anybody else with anything? Prabhuji?
I have a question about, you said that the first Rasa Lila took place under the coil of Kaliya.
Yeah.
I never heard that before.
Yeah.
Where is it mentioned?
Brihad Bhagavatamrita. Sanatana Goswami, he says another far out thing there too. He says that Krishna, the Nagapatnis, the wives of Kaliya, they offered their uttariyas, their cloths, outer cloths, to Krishna. And Krishna took them and he made a rope out of it. And he put it through Kaliya's nose. And then with one hand he was holding on to that rope. And the other hand he was playing his flute. And he drove Kaliya like a horse down the Jamuna River. And it says that even sometimes when he goes to Mathura, he goes with the Krura, but sometimes he rides on Kaliya to go to Mathura. Sanatana Goswami says like that. Far out things. So many beautiful things in Krishna Katha. Prabhuji, something else?
Thank you. I would just make a comment.
Yeah.
Just to add to what you said earlier about this question regarding the Nama and the Bhagavatam.
Uh-huh.
Prabhupada says in a purport, I have it written down in a notebook. I think in the first canto or the second canto, he says that there's no difference, just like what you said.
Uh-huh.
He said there's no difference between chanting Hare Krishna and reading Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah, these two things. In fact, Srila Prabhupada, when they started doing 24-hour kirtan in Vrindavan, they had an understanding that they stopped for Bhagavatam class. But that's not stopping. The kirtan's continuing to go, just in a different form. But as we want to discuss on that day when we have that talk, God's Idiots, there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between Krishna Nam and Krishna Katha, and both are required, because if you don't have the Krishna Katha, what kind of Krishna Nam will you have? What kind of conception will you have of Nam? It's another thing. Govinda Valda.
Thank you so much. I really like how you mentioned that the demons of Vrindavan represent, I've heard about the nartas in the heart, but you said specifically how they represent our blockages on the path to Vrindavan or Vrindavan Bhakti. That gave me a new light on these anarthas, because as you said, the goal of Bhakti is not anarthali priti, and reaching Vrindavan. So that was so much more relevant, and also how Yamuna Devi, the life of Bhakti, life of Vrindavan, how criticism really poisons it. It just makes it much more easier to take it more seriously. All those.
Yeah, Jamunaya Hridrogaha. Kavi Karnapur says it's a heart disease in the Jamuna. So we want to create Vrindavan villages. When we say on our pathway to Vrindavan, that we want to. You don't go to Vrindavan alone. What is so special about Vrindavan? It's not that just the Vamsivat is there and the Jamuna is there, Govardhan Hill is there, but it's the devotees that are there. And Govardhan Hill is a devotee. And Vamsivat, the tree, is a devotee. And the Jamuna is a devotee. They're all devotees there. And it's their presence which makes Vrindavan so very, very special. So if we want to create Vrindavan villages, it's not possible by ourselves. We have to work with devotees. And just like in a game of cards, you can only play with whatever cards you've been dealt. I mean, this is what we've got. You may not like it. We may not like our association. Sometimes we may complain about it. But this is what we've got. And for some reason or other, Krishna sent us this association to teach us something, to expand us. And there's some lesson I have to learn from this. This is our community. But let's go deep in our community by having Krishna Katha, and we'll bond together in that way. And we may speak some more about this tomorrow morning, I think, too. Anything else from anybody? Mataji.
Thank you very much for that wonderful class. I was just thinking how we should develop the attitude that association of devotees is the most important thing in our spiritual practice, and that we would endeavor in develop good qualities and bring something, give something into the relationship with devotees, because when we are talking about anarthas and these stories about the demons in our hearts, it reminds me that that we should really pray to Krishna, those who are Balaram didn't kill, and those who Balaram also killed, that we really try to consciously working on ourselves, on our these bad qualities, and looking also and learn from other devotees how to be a better Vaishnava and to serve proper way, and how to deal with those anarthas. That's, I think, very important thing.
Very important. Thank you very much. And without association with the devotees, how can we have inspiration? But we mentioned this beautiful verse, one of my favorite verses probably, 11.330, Bhagavatam. Parasprana katanam pavanam bhagavadyasa. We should learn how to associate with devotees by coming together and having paraspara, anukatanam, back and forth discussions about Krishna. Parasprana katanam pavanam bhagavadyasa, that Bhagavad Yasa, the glories of Krishna, is pavana. That's very purifying for us. And in that association, mito rata mitas tushya nivrita mita atmana, something happens in that association when we develop faith in each other. We have trust. And that's a big thing to develop. It's one thing, we have some trust, we like each other, yeah, you guys are okay, we'll do kirtan together, but I don't know. I'm not going to tell them about this deep, dark thing in my heart. They'll make fun of me, or they'll criticize me, or this or that. To have that much faith. Mito ratir mitas tushya navita mita atman. In his Sridhar Swami Bhavarta Dipika commentary, he says that when devotees develop that trust through hearing and chanting together, through this paraspara, this back and forth discussion about the philosophy, about things, then you develop that faith in each other. And you, in that faith, you reveal your heart. And like you're saying, you know, I have this problem. I've got this anartha in my heart, and what should I do? And other devotees say, you know, I used to also have the same problem too. I was also really attached to watching that movie or this thing or that. But I gave it up when the kirtan was so good, or this or that was so good. And then someone else said, well, he gave it up. I can also do the same thing. We need to have examples of persons. If there's no example, if there's no saints in a society, there's no society. We need to have saints. We need to have living examples. Big saints and little saints. And every temple has both. We have some big saints, we have some gurus, sadhu gurus who come, and we have little saints, the pujaris and cooks and other devotees who are working so hard to keep everything going. And they're saints. And we need their examples very badly. Anybody else, anything? Okay. Do you have any concluding comments, or shall we go ahead and stop? Okay. Thank you all very much. Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohanju ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol, Vancha Kalpatarubhishcha, Kripa Sindhu Bhyeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha, Ananda Kori Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai.